A few years ago, I made a video on feminine archetypes, and in that video, I mentioned that if I got good feedback, I got an interest in the video, I would continue and talk about more feminine archetypes and make more videos on feminine archetypes. But unfortunately, I didn't deliver that until now. We're going to dive into the feminine archetypes, and I have a few modifications and things I want to say on what I already discussed in that video, and I want to introduce to you a couple more archetypes that really narrow down the subcategory, so to speak, of feminine women. The concept of feminine archetypes, I think, truly is something that we can all learn from for the purpose of the fact that it helps us see ourselves as feminine women, as unique feminine women with different personalities, and it helps us refine and have a better vision of the type of feminine woman we want to be, while also being realistic of the pitfalls and being honest with ourselves of the negative aspects of our feminine tendencies that overall help us become better and more self-actualized women. So before we dive into the video, I do want to encourage you, as always, to hit the like button if you enjoy this type of content. Leave your comments down below, your feedback, where do you see yourself? I really enjoy reading all the comments that I receive on this channel. If you want to take it a step further, please consider becoming a member of my channel. I've recently opened the membership side portion of this channel, and it really does help support the work and the message behind my content over here. So anyway, let's dive right into the video, because I briefly reviewed my old video from a couple years ago, and I have a few things, like I mentioned, I want to modify and add. So I talked about the traditional feminine woman as the first archetype that I introduced, and when I listed this archetype, I really had in mind the girly personality. But I've come to notice that there really can be a subset category to the traditional feminine woman, which would be more of the angelic feminine woman, more of the angelic archetype. This type of woman would be what, like, I'm not really into the woo-woo type of stuff, but like people maybe say in passing or popular culture, a young soul, just that innocent person that goes through life that sometimes we think is just lucky, but in reality, it's a manifestation of their personality, their angelic tendencies, their playful nature, their more so childlike spirit, their ability to look at the positive in life and really see everything like an adventure or a game. This is something that I personally strive to be, and I am working on a video for the member side of my channel, which is the angelic wife, because this is not my natural tendency at all, but it is something that I want to lean in more so, because I find that it helps me connect with my children as well as the pure love aspect of my marriage. The angelic feminine is honestly what we think about when we think about perfection, the perfect and ideal woman. And this can cause a lot of frustration for many of us, because this is a very rare archetype, which is like a sub-archetype of, I mentioned, the traditional feminine woman, which would appeal more so to girliness. You can actually be more of an angelic archetype of a traditional woman, but not be so girly. She is just the kind of person that you feel at ease around and that you want to be around. But also, again, you just wonder how like this type of personality is so blessed and so lucky. And I think that if you have this type of personality in your life, you can really admire the femininity of this person, but you also have to be aware not to be jealous of this person, because like I said, this is something that doesn't come natural to a large majority of women, but it's an outlook that we can try to admire and apply in our lives. By the way, for those of you who are new here, like, you will hear my kids in the background because I'm a full-time wife and mother, so just when I make my content, it's a little bit chaotic here, but that's the only way that I can get it done. And I also talked about cons in this video, so if you do identify yourself more so with the archetype of the angelic traditional personality, you have to be careful of not being too naive. You have more so what I would say like a pure soul, so you think the best of other people, but a large majority of people who are walking on this earth, especially nowadays, have more narcissistic tendencies just because of the way that our culture is set up. Be wary and have a close-knit circle of people that you can feel relaxed and yourself at ease with. And I also think for these women, being in marriages with traditionally masculine men who protect them is very important. Having your husband as a confidant that you can trust, and even having a close family member that you can trust before you make major life decisions, or to like navigate through your workplace. If you have somebody that you trust, like a mentor, that would be very helpful for you not to be taken advantage of. Because the angelic feminine woman, if she's like overworked, she will naturally want to be like, you know, giving, and she will be taken advantage in terms of being overworked, but her light will just like die out kind of like a firefly, because she doesn't have the capacity to have more so of that fighter spirit. And again, that is not a bad thing. These are just women that really are a blessing to the world and need to be protected. Next up, I talked about the classic feminine archetype, and a sub archetype to this in relation to the classic feminine archetype would be the intellectual. Now, again, like I mentioned in that first original video, you can be a combination of different archetypes. When you think about like Belle from Beauty of the Beast, a lot of times she fits that like stereotypical feminine archetype of the intellectual, but she has a mix of that angelic traditional femininity. So that's how you can really see the angelic femininity that isn't necessarily the traditional girliness, but it's mixed with the intellectual classic femininity. And she's not the classic femininity that I talked about, type A, rigid structure more so. She appeals more so to the intellectual side of the classic feminine archetype woman. Now you could fit, you know, the classic feminine archetype woman, like I mentioned, type A, very like polished, but also be intellectual. This is why we see a lot of women who are more feminine in fields such as law. I come across women all the time online that are very naturally feminine, but they are also intellectual. They gravitate more so towards a classic feminine archetype, but with that intellectual flair. A friend of mine, History May, she embodies a lot of the intellectual feminine, and her work that she has on YouTube as well as TikTok and Instagram is truly a work of art, because it has that feminine touch but is very intellectual. Now, these women have to be careful because they can lack empathy because of focusing more so on facts. This will lead them into more masculine type of energy, so to speak, which can cause for them to be drained because they lose the creativity by solely getting sucked into just factual information, as well as fighting with other people based on intellectual debate. You can be a smart and intelligent woman, but there are what people like to call energy sucking vampires out there, especially on the internet, that will just drain your energy when you try to have productive, life-giving intellectual conversations and grow your mind, but they are just interested in debate and they do not have any leeway to meet you in the middle. So if you gravitate more so towards the intellectual classical feminine archetype, you need to be aware of that, and you need to protect your space and how you express your intellectual abilities. And this is also where the stereotype of like girly and feminine women are dumb needs to be broken, because the intellectual feminine can harness her sort of like mother's intuition and her inkling for things by emotional intelligence and observing the world to focus her attention and get to concrete facts, which is different than the masculine. And oftentimes that's why you hear men who praise their wives, because they have that ability and it's really helped them in their career. Next up on the original video, I talked about the glamorous feminine, and it got me thinking about a sub archetype related to that, which would be the vixen. You have the glamorous archetype, like I mentioned in that video, where they can just like, they pull it off dressing a certain way, or like maybe more provocatively, sorry about my language, but it doesn't look slutty. They're just able to pull that off and have those bold statements. And so a sub archetype to that would be more accented on sensuality, which would be the vixen, and not necessarily that the vixen dresses in that way that she can pull it off. It can be more so a focus on like sensuality. She has that presence when you're talking to her. She has that warmth. She's able to touch your arm when she's talking to you, but it's not in a sexual way. She's able to host parties, for example, and have people feel comfortable and just have that warm environment. She's the life of the party without being a party girl. And so when you have this, and especially like in sensuality, she's the type of woman that many men are like addicted to. I think that every feminine archetype can learn from this woman, because when we're talking about sexuality in the context of a marriage, being able to play up this and feel comfortable around her spouse and act like the vixen is a very important part of a healthy marriage. But in the same breath, this woman has to be careful, because the life of the party, the sensuality, sexuality that can lead her into territory of being more so, for lack of better terms, a hoe. So this type of woman benefits from, and of course everybody in my opinion benefits from being a Christian, but leaning more so into that culture of like having moral standards when it comes to relationships and like courting would better help this woman stay on track. She treads a very fine line where she can be overly flirtatious, and so if things like marriage are important to her, she needs to constantly remind herself of what her boundaries are. And lastly, in the original video I talked about the free-spirited feminine personality, and there are actually many different subtypes when I think about this personality in terms of archetypes. My daughter's at my feet right now, so we're only going to go into two. First one is the thrill and adventure seeker. She might be somebody who benefits from more high intensity workouts, who is the type of person that like her idea of a good time is going on a very advanced hike or some sort of like daredevil activity, but her risk-taking ability can really unleash that inner feminine spirit of carefreeness that many of us seek to reignite that we had as little girls, of adventures, of exploring the world. And many of us don't have the guts to be like the free-spirited feminine woman who is the thrill seeker, but we can seek to add a little bit more adventure in our lives by admiring her perhaps travels or outdoor activities that she combines with her fitness. For her, she does have to be careful not to tread more in the masculine territory of things, because a lot of her hobbies might align with like the realm of what many men do. And I'm not saying that women can't do like sports that men do, but like I've mentioned in many of my videos, it's important to retain a close circle of friends who are feminine and do things in feminine spaces to preserve your feminine spirit yourself. So for her, she's going to have to really balance out having different archetypes for friends to keep her in touch with other elements of her feminine personality. And also this can benefit like her female children have different feminine archetypes, or like I mentioned, her friends, bringing those women out of their comfort zone and doing more adventurous activities together. Like she's the type of person that would plan a bachelorette trip in like the middle of the forest in like a cool Airbnb that overlooks a waterfall. This is the type of friend that would be so interesting to have, because like if you are more of a rigid classic feminine archetype, you probably, that wouldn't be the thing that you would naturally do at first glance. And lastly, I want to talk about the wise woman, and this is often associated with like Mother Nature. And I've mentioned before that it really rubbed me the wrong way when I got a comment at the beginning of starting my channel basically talking about how I wasn't a Christian because I mentioned Mother Nature. But what I'm talking about in Mother Nature is not like mother worshipping nature. It is just a saying that people use to characterize that feminine side of nature, of being outside. And how does this relate to the wise woman? Because when I think about the free-spirited feminine woman and I think about the wise woman, I think about Mother Nature. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is the type of person that is like plant-oriented and all natural, so to speak. The wise woman has that more so like old soul, like they talk about in modern culture, type of presence. She is the type of person, she says so much without saying anything at all. She's the type of person that would observe your interactions or like a group of people talking, and she will be able to say one line and it is a thing that sticks out in your mind for years to come. She just knows what to say, when to say it. She can be an older woman. They tend to be older women, but again, she can be that type of very comforting mother spirit, and she's a lot of times what people would say is the mom of a friend group, like always responsible. And it does sort of relate to the classic in terms of rigidity, but it's not quite that. She's able to make you draw your own conclusions of if your decisions are good or not, rather than like the classic archetype would be more so logical and telling you how your decisions make sense or not. But for her, what she has to be careful of is of being able to loosen up, of lacking more so of that playful type of spirit, because her energy is also mostly like unisex in a lot of ways. So she has to make sure that she's still including elements of girliness into who she is as a feminine woman to add that extra dimension of womanhood. So she would do well with like forcing herself to consume frivolous, modern culture type of content so that she can also relate to the modern culture, especially if she's not like an older woman. She still has like certain things she has to accomplish, like blend in the workforce or out there in the dating scene. She needs to tone down her maturity a little bit and reserve that for the most important people in her life, and be strategic about when that wise woman nature comes out. So anyway, that's all I have for today. Leave your comments down below. As always, support the channel by becoming a member if that's something that you'd love to do. I'm very grateful. Hit the subscribe button if you're new here. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.